Let me tell you about the silence that arrives at midnight on your birthday. It is not a peaceful silence. It is the hollow sound of a heart refusing to beat with anticipation. A deliberate shutdown, where your mind chooses safety over the dangerous gamble of hope. It's 12:01 a.m. You instinctively check your phone, not because you hope for messages, not because you are actually craving a flood of notifications, but because a small, ancient part of your brain is checking to see if it still needs to activate its disappointment defense system. The fact that you pretend you don't care is the clearest, most heartbreaking sign that you once cared too much. When we were children, the birthday was a gravitational pull. The world stopped, the attention aligned, and for one small, sacred day, existence felt loud and justified. Your entire self was validated by the simple fact of your survival. You made it another year. Balloons, cake, the turning of everyone's eyes toward you. This was the external proof that you mattered. Now, that same date arrives, and you hear yourself say the standard, almost rehearsed lines, "Oh, I don't really celebrate," or "It's just another day." We tell ourselves this is maturity. We say we have simply outgrown the need for glitter and grand gestures. But what if it isn't growth at all? What if it is a calculated retreat? Psychologically, the birthday is an emotional mirror. It reflects, in sharp focus, how you feel about being alive, how comfortable you are being seen, and how you relate to attention. And when the reflection you see is one of quiet indifference, we have to look closer. We have to ask, is this peaceful independence? Or is it anhedonic shutdown? Is this genuine peace? Or is this the sound of a system that has learned to numb itself to survive? For many high-functioning adults, the transition from excitement to quiet withdrawal is a response to chronic emotional inconsistency. They felt forgotten too many times, or the celebration always felt conditional, forcing them to manage expectations that were never met. So, instead of continuing to ask for recognition, they built a wall. Instead of risking the hurt of hoping someone remembers, they decided to simply not hope at all. This is the core emotional pain we are exploring. The choice to treat a day that marks existence itself as utterly normal. It is the difference between genuine contentment and the creation of an emotional neutral zone, a place where vulnerability might surface, but is quickly replaced by practicality. Because the feeling underneath that casual shrug, the one we are often afraid to name, is not coldness or detachment. It is the fear that if we were to let ourselves feel the full weight of the day, we would be left with an unbearable emptiness. The quietest sign of this internal struggle is the profound, aching longing for connection that lives beneath the surface of the nonchalant demeanor. This subtle, pervasive emotional numbness is the very thing that MindRabbit is built to investigate. To understand this retreat, we have to look at the architecture of self-protection. Think of yourself not as a person walking through life, but as a person walking through your life encased in the glass armor. This armor was not constructed overnight. It was built, brick by emotional brick. Every time you reached out for validation and were met with silence, or every time your needs were framed as an inconvenience. When you look at someone who says, "I don't really do birthdays," you see composure, but what you are actually witnessing is the person walking through their own life like a guest at someone else's party, polite, observant, maybe even giving, but ultimately distant. They are detached from the central joy because they cannot afford to be hurt by the central stage. The birthday, in this context, becomes an annual risk assessment. It's the one day the armor feels thin, translucent. Imagine the day unfolding. You wake up, you go through your routine, and you consciously decide to over-index on normalcy. You work a little harder, you take on extra tasks, you pour yourself a stronger cup of coffee. Why? Because routine is stable and stability is safe. The moment you break the routine, the moment you allow a crack for spontaneity or celebration, you invite the possibility of disappointment. And so, you maintain this composed facade. You send polite, casual replies to the few messages that arrive. You smile and say, "No big plans," when a colleague asks. You are managing the external world with remarkable emotional intelligence, but you are neglecting the internal one. Inside that glass armor, you are observing, you are counting, you are quietly logging who remembered, who didn't, and who responded with mere acknowledgement versus genuine presence. This silent inventory, this private internal ledger of who saw you, is the subtle, inverted form of caring that we are so terrified to admit to. If you don't put up the glass armor, If you allow yourself to hope for the balloons and the feeling you had as a child, the pain of being overlooked on this singular, symbolic day would be too severe. So, you preemptively numb the anticipation. You choose the quiet collapse of expectation over the loud heartbreak of neglect. And this is where the mind begins its deep, physiological retreat. What we are talking about here, this anticipatory shutdown, is not a philosophical choice. It is a neurological survival mechanism. It is the brain performing emotional cost-cutting. Every human brain operates on a system of prediction and reward, heavily influenced by the neurotransmitter dopamine. When you anticipate something good, a great dinner, a successful presentation, or the joy of a birthday party, dopamine spikes in the reward pathways, particularly in the nucleus accumbens. This spike is the engine of expectation. Now, consider a history of unmet expectations. Imagine repeatedly spiking your dopamine in anticipation of genuine connection or celebration, only to have that anticipation crash into the hard wall of disappointment. The reward system is receiving a consistent, painful signal. Anticipation equals pain. The intelligent, adaptive brain learns this pattern. To maintain stability, to prevent the constant emotional whiplash, it performs a strategic shutdown. We can call this the activation of the emotional fuse box. The brain says, if the cost of high expectation is a massive emotional debt, we will simply cut the power to that circuit. The reward system becomes deliberately muted on days that carry a high probability of risk, like a birthday. You are not feeling less. You are being protected from feeling too much that day. This is why, when someone does try to celebrate you, it often feels awkward, almost jarring. It's like suddenly flipping the main power switch back onto a circuit that has been intentionally turned off for years. The system doesn't know how to handle the sudden surge of positive input. You might find yourself smiling mechanically, seeking an exit, or minimizing the gesture. Your lack of excitement isn't a character flaw. It is an optimized response to a world that has taught you vulnerability is expensive. The brain, prioritizing stability over excitement, has chosen anhedonia, the reduced ability to feel pleasure, as the most efficient form of self-preservation. It is a brilliant, quiet piece of architecture designed to keep the lights on, even if the house feels a little dark inside. This leads us to a specific psychological profile often found behind the glass armor, the perpetual giver. In many American social circles, there is an unwritten expectation for certain individuals to become the emotional anchor, the responsible one, the strong one, the person who remembers everyone else's milestones. They are the ones who organize, who check in, who offer the space for others to be vulnerable. Over time, this role internalizes a silent, toxic message. Your joy comes second. Your emotional needs are secondary to the emotional stability of the group. For this individual, the discomfort they feel when their own birthday approaches is not humility. It is a profound, deep-seated emotional fatigue. They are exhausted from constantly managing the emotional environment, and the sudden shift of the spotlight onto them feels unnatural, even aggressive. Think of it as the emotional equivalent of a high-performance engine that has been running non-stop for years. The day it is supposed to rest, the attention it receives feels less like nourishment and more like inspection. This fatigue manifests in a specific paradox. Deep down, the giver still craves to feel seen, but they don't want the loud, surface-level attention of confetti and superficial posts. They don't want attention. They crave understanding. They want someone to acknowledge not just the date they were born, but who they've been becoming, the invisible battles they won, the weight they quietly carried throughout the year. But because they have never allowed themselves to ask for this deep understanding, they preemptively reject the shallow celebration that is offered instead. This is the psychological tax paid by those who prioritize strength and self-reliance above all else. They become masterful at giving love and support, but they lose the ability to receive it without suspicion. They suspect the motives behind the gesture, or they simply cannot reconcile their need for connection with the identity they have built, the identity that needs nothing from anyone. And so, the birthday becomes a neutral zone. It is safer to dismiss the day entirely than to allow the possibility that, after a year of giving, your own quiet need might be overlooked again. This is the profound cost of the giver's dilemma, trading the chance for deep connection for the guarantee of emotional control. the essence of this phenomenon. What truly ties the glass armor and the emotional fuse box together is the distinction between validation and existence. We must acknowledge this quiet, powerful truth. We are not craving the loud praise. We are simply craving to be seen, not for what we have achieved, not for the success we've displayed on LinkedIn, but simply because we exist. Birthdays are deeply symbolic. They are the annual anchor point that confirms your journey, the fact that you made it here, a living continuation of every past version of yourself. And for those of us who have learned self-reliance the hard way, this is where the conflict becomes most acute. We have spent years convincing ourselves that we do not need external validation. We define maturity as internal sufficiency. Yet, that doesn't eliminate the fundamental human need for witnessing. We want someone to bear witness to our struggle, our quiet growth, and our simple, ongoing existence. This is the core truth I want to offer. The person who treats their birthday like a normal day often doesn't need a massive celebration. They need confirmation that their quiet existence still ripples outward. They need to know they are still on someone's mind, not out of obligation, but out of genuine presence. Your detachment, then, is not indifference. It is an act of defense against the deepest kind of pain, the pain of being structurally invisible. You preemptively claim invisibility on the one day you should be most visible, because the alternative, being visible and still overlooked, is intolerable. When you meet someone who treats their birthday this way, understand that they are operating under a system of inverted caring. They care so deeply about the meaning of the day that they must protect it from the inevitable failure of human memory and inconsistency. They have traded the fleeting, unpredictable thrill of external excitement for the grounded, consistent calm of emotional control. But this control comes with a heavy toll, a silent, ever-present echo that asks, "I hope someone still remembers." This is the paradox of emotional evolution. You can be content, grounded, and fiercely independent, yet still carry the subtle, aching longing for connection. That ache is not weakness. It is humanity asserting itself against the architecture of disappointment. Beyond disappointment and social pressures, there is a layer of existential reflection that solidifies this behavior. We call it temporal self-awareness. Birthdays, stripped of confetti and expectation, are actually annual checkpoints of consciousness. They are mandatory pauses in the relentless pace of modern American life, forcing you to look backward. They ask you a simple yet brutal question: am I living honestly? The confrontation is silent, internal, and often uncomfortable. You look back at the person you were a year ago, and you measure the distance between who you wanted to be and who you are now. If that gap is wide, if the last year was marked by heaviness, confusion, or stagnation, the birthday feels less like a milestone and more like a subtle confrontation with failure. To many, downplaying the day is an act of self-preservation against this existential pressure. It is a way of blurring the date into the rest of the week, reducing its symbolic weight so that time doesn't feel too heavy, so that another year doesn't feel like another deadline missed. They think, if I don't make it a big deal, then it won't feel like another year slipping away without having answered the essential questions. This is not apathy. It is deep, private introspection. It is the mind saying, give me space to process my own timeline without an audience. Not every kind of growth needs to be broadcast. Some growth is quiet, invisible. It's in the way you react differently than you used to, the way you forgive faster, or the way you find beauty in moments that once went unnoticed. The adult birthday, therefore, shifts meaning entirely. When you were a child, your birthday was about the world recognizing you. When you are an adult, it becomes about you recognizing yourself. It's less about presence and more about presence, less about who shows up and more about how much of you has shown up in your own life this year. For the MindRabbit viewer, this redefinition is crucial. Treating your birthday like a normal day can, ironically, be the highest form of respect for your own internal journey. It signifies that your life is already full enough, full of complexity, quiet wins, and ongoing evolution, to not need external validation to make a single date meaningful. You are simply seeking to align the internal reality with the external performance. If you recognize yourself in this quiet armor, the need for control, the self-imposed isolation on your own day, it is time to practice a gentle form of guidance, moving not toward grand celebration, but toward conscious relaxation of the defense system. Healing here is not about reverting to childhood excitement. It is about consciously dismantling the glass armor one piece at a time, allowing for a controlled, safe exposure to connection. The first step is acknowledging the emotional cost-cutting. Understand that your emotional numbness is not a flaw. It is a successful, though painful, protective mechanism. Thank your nervous system for keeping you safe, and then, subtly, intentionally, begin to challenge its necessity. The path of recovery begins by granting yourself permission to be imperfectly seen. You must accept that you deserve to be recognized, even if you fear the disappointment that comes with hoping for it. The recovery of your reward system starts when you allow yourself to feel a need, without the compulsion to immediately shame or negate it. The challenge is to perform a small, intentional act of vulnerability, not towards the world, but towards one trusted person, or even towards yourself. You do not need to ask for a party. You can ask for a specific, meaningful moment. Instead of saying, "It's just another day," try saying, "I just need a quiet moment of presence today," or "I'd really appreciate a simple call, no big deal." This small act of articulating a need that has been buried under layers of self-sufficiency and emotional fatigue, is the first true sign that you are allowing the emotional fuse box to be examined instead of simply accepted as permanently off. You are giving yourself the right to a tiny moment of light without demanding that the entire world illuminate for you. For the perpetual giver, the healing lesson is this: you do not have to earn joy by being strong all year. You deserve warmth and acknowledgement not for what you do, but for the inherent fact of who you are. The self-sufficient soul still needs to be nourished by connection. Your recovery begins by honoring yourself with stillness, a quiet day off, a long walk, a favorite meal cooked solely for you. This is the new, mature form of celebration. But even in that solitude, let the possibility of outside acknowledgement linger. Let them say your name. Let them remind you that you still ripple outward. You are simply learning that while connection is essential, the volume of that connection can be dictated by your own terms, not the world's noisy expectations. So, if your birthday ever feels like just another day, if you checked your messages, made your coffee, and carried on, do not feel guilty for it. It is not emptiness. It is the quiet evidence of evolution. It is the mind learning that meaning does not require noise. We have explored the architecture of this retreat. We know that the person who treats their birthday normally is often the most reflective, the most self-aware, and the one who has learned the hard, expensive lesson that emotional stability is sometimes only achieved through the sacrifice of anticipation. But we must conclude with an honesty that goes beyond the defense mechanism. Even when we are content with our quiet independence, a quiet voice persists, the phantom limb of hope. It reminds us that we never truly outgrow the need for connection, only our ability to camouflage it effectively. The most beautiful thing about growing up is learning that celebration does not always need confetti. Sometimes it just needs a moment of awareness, a deep breath, a moment where you stop running the self-protection protocol. It is about you looking into that emotional mirror and whispering to the child who once counted down to midnight with glowing eyes, "Hey, I see you, we made it another year." That self-acknowledgement, that internal witnessing, is the kind of celebration that doesn't fade when the candles go out. It stays with you, integrated into the core of your being. You do not have to make a wish for the future. You already are a wish, a living continuation of every version of yourself that navigated the disappointment and made it here. Even when you treat your birthday like a normal day, let the small gestures in. Let them remind you that you matter, because maybe that's the final psychological truth. You can be utterly grounded in your self-reliance and still allow the warmth of another human presence to touch your glass armor. It is not about seeking validation. It is about allowing yourself a simple, temporary moment of connection that nourishes the part of you that carries everyone else. You do not have to seek the extraordinary. You have simply learned to find the extraordinary inside the ordinary.